morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. So welcome to our meeting number 3 for branding, marketing, and outreach for our Route 66 BRT study. This meeting is for our steering committee, and we have our management team present, as you know, representing this City of Tulsa Mayor's Office, the Tulsa Planning Office, and the Transportation Division at INCOG. Our lead staff team is present as well. My name is Paulina Baeza, John Tankard, and Ty Simmons from INCOG / Tulsa Planning Office, as well as Chase Phillips and Leanne Alfaro from Tulsa Transit. We also have members of our supporting staff team to assist us in the process of our work. And our consultant team, HNTV, which is going to be in charge of the second portion of this meeting. So the agenda for today includes 2 blocks. Firstly, we're going to focus on presenting updates on the project. The Tulsa Planning Office will do so. And block 2, marketing strategy and further outreach efforts, will be presented by HNTV Consulting. So for block 1, our updates, we will cover a recap of the project, our downtown alignment and stops, our final route alignment and station location, and an advance on the land use framework. So to begin, regarding the recap of the project, as you might remember, when we were assigned to do this project, we had basically 3 goals: to identify the alignment for the Route 66 bus rapid transit route, to identify stop locations along that selected alignment, and to develop a strategy for marketing and branding of the Route 66 BRT. So based on this, we also had 2 guiding principles. Firstly, to ensure social equity by focusing resources to marginalized populations. And secondly, to promote existing assets and to encourage further economic development of the BRT corridor. We were asked to analyze both 11th and 21st Street between Harvard and Garnett, covering north to south alignments: Harvard, Yale, Sheridan, Memorial, and Garnett. And we had 2 fixed segments on the east side from 145th East Avenue to Garnett along 21st Street, a segment that would cover the Eastgate Metroplex Employment Center as well as the Tulsa Global District. And on the west side, from Harvard to the downtown area, in order to cover the University of Tulsa and the downtown area along 11th Street. So we had to do this analysis, and we chose to do it through strategic planning, which is a data-oriented process that we use to assess decision-making. So we determined that the process would include 4 main phases. Firstly, assembling teams. Secondly, defining the route. Third, station location. And finally, branding and engagement. And we will have 2 sets of meetings for each of these 3 phases. So we translated the guiding principles into guiding principle indicators. For our first guiding principle regarding social equity, we determined that we had 2 categories: demographics and equity, and education and youth. And for economic development and existing assets, employment, and tourism. So firstly, for phase 1, team assembly, as you know, we have a staff team that is the lead, but we also created a team of staff members from City of Tulsa, INCOG, Tulsa Planning Office, as well as Tulsa Transit to assist us in reviewing the process. And we created the steering committee, which would also provide us feedback, particularly around the indicators and all of the information that would come subsequently regarding the guiding principles. So for the steering committee, we decided to look for experts around these 4 main categories, and that's how you got that invitation from us. Now for phase 2, defining the route, what we did was for each of these indicator categories, we selected a series of data points that would represent them. For example, for demographics and equity, we looked into data points related to lower household incomes, minorities, and reliance on alternate modes of transportation. For education and youth, we looked at schools and youth destinations. For employment, we looked at various types of jobs, particularly those in lower ranges of earning and employment center locations. And finally, for tourism, we looked at destinations of interest for this purpose: hotels, dining and retail establishments, event centers, landmarks, etc. What we did was we gathered feedback from you during the meetings regarding the indicators that we selected. And of course, also regarding assigning weights and comments to our data points using a survey. We also received comments from you via email, and you provide us important information, as in which indicators we should include, what the weights should look like, what we should be prioritizing, which places, improving connectivity, surveying transit riders and drivers, etc. Now, we also looked at another general category, which would be feasibility indicators, how feasible this project is. And those included 4 categories as well: cost analysis, existing transit, built environment, and connectivity. So for feasibility indicators, cost analysis implied the development of a cost analysis study that was developed by HNTV. So it's basically looking at operational costs and fiber installation costs, for example. For existing transit, we looked at Tulsa transit ridership numbers and collected data using ridership surveys at popular stops. For built environment, we looked at need-based destinations along the corridors, the areas we were to analyze. And finally, for connectivity, we looked at multimodal transportation networks that could connect to our corridors. So for the feasibility indicators, this data was analyzed and got feedback from our staff team. So we completed a survey internally, averaged weights, we compared them in the strategic planning model, we collected the ridership data, and we conducted this survey of riders of Route 140 and 150 with interns during last summer. And as I mentioned, the consultant team also developed an operational and cost analysis. Now, the percentages that we got for this were for the guiding principle indicators, both demographics and equity and employment got 30% each. And for education and youth, 25%, and tourism, 15%. This would be a 100% score for our guiding principle indicators. For feasibility and access indicators, we gave cost analysis of 40%, existing transit at 30%, and both built environment and connectivity 15% each. This would give us, like I said, a score for guiding principle analysis and would help us choose the top 3 north-south bound alignments. For the case of guiding principle indicators, we have Sheridan, Garnett, and Yale. And for feasibility and access, Garnett, Memorial, and Sheridan. Now, when we do an analysis of a BRT score where guiding principles and feasibility are each 50%, our top alignment was Garnett. So Garnett ended up being a recommended choice. We shared this with you during our last meeting, and it was approved. And it had several highlights, like it was the most cost-effective option, high on diversity, most hotels, large amount of shift work jobs, balance of incomes, most Route 66 landmarks, etc. So just to mention a few destinations, we obviously know that on the fixed segments of the route, on the west side, we have obviously the downtown area, which includes the Denver Avenue station, as well as the Meadow Gold District in the area. We also have the Mother Road Market and the University of Tulsa. And on the east side, we have East Tulsa Main Street or Tulsa Global District, as well as the Eastgate Metroplex Employment Center. Now, along the alignment that was selected, we have some interesting Route 66 landmarks. So for example, the Desert Hills Motel or Tally's Cafe, the Rose Bowl, and also parks like Braden Park, McClure Park, and of course, access to the Mingo Trail. We have schools like Street School and Lindbergh Elementary, and other important destinations that are need-based like restaurants, employers, and grocery stores. Now with that, I'll give it to Ty Simmons to explain phase 3 station location.
Thanks, Paulina. So I'm going to briefly recap how we identified stops along the route, as well as how we prioritize them in the event of funding constraints. So as you may recall, during our second steering committee meeting, which we held last November, we divided each of you up into 6 teams and placed you in breakout rooms where we asked you to locate up to 10 stops along a roughly 2-mile stretch of the corridor. And so this map just shows the results of that exercise corridor-wide. Since each team's sections overlapped with other team sections, we had to reconcile those and identify like the best location. And we garnered feedback from Tulsa Transit as well as HNTB during this process. We then set out to prioritize the stops into 3 priority categories in the event of any funding constraints going forward. So priority 1 stops included the 2 termini, Denver Avenue Station and Eastgate Metroplex, as well as the 11th and Peoria intersection where the Route 66 BRT would intersect with the Peoria Arrow BRT. Priority 1 stops also included transfer points to other Tulsa Transit routes, as well as arterial intersections, including Utica Avenue. Stops located between the arterial streets were generally ranked as priority 2, and then we had 3 locations that we ranked as priority 3 based on adjacent land uses and/or ridership potential. You may have also noticed from these maps that we didn't show anything for downtown. We decided to involve the Downtown Coordinating Council to help identify alignment and stops for the downtown area. We met with DCC and Tulsa Transit and identified 3 potential alignments for downtown and performed our strategic planning analysis on each alignment using a 3-block radius. So this map shows alignment option A, which we call the Boulder-Cincinnati alignment. Beginning at DAS, the bus would travel north on Denver to 2nd Street and on to Cincinnati, taking advantage of the existing Peoria Arrow BRT stop at 2nd and Main next to the Hyatt Hotel. Once on Cincinnati, the bus would travel south to 11th Street and then proceed east on 11th toward Eastgate. So on the inbound trip from Eastgate to DAS, the bus would come in on 11th and travel over to Boulder, up Boulder to 6th, and then over to Denver, and then up to DAS. And this alignment performed best in our strategic planning analysis when you consider downtown employment. So alignment option B, which we named Denver Avenue, would essentially use Denver Avenue for the inbound and outbound trips. The bus would leave DAS and travel north on Denver to 3rd, then over to Cheyenne, and then south on Cheyenne to 6th, and then over to Denver, and down to 11th and head out east to Eastgate. On the inbound trip, the bus would come in on 11th and travel to Denver, and then up Denver all the way to DAS. And this option ranked best for creativity based on our strategic planning analysis. And the third option, option C, which we named Elgin 7th 2nd, utilizes Denver Avenue, 2nd Street, Elgin Avenue, and 7th Street. So the bus would leave DAS and travel north on Denver to 2nd Street, and then along 2nd to Elgin, again taking advantage of the existing Peoria Arrow BRT stop at 2nd and Main. And then once on Elgin, it would travel south to 11th Street, and then east to Eastgate. And then on the inbound trip, the bus would come in to downtown on 11th and travel north on Elgin to 7th, and then along 7th to Denver, and then to DAS. So this option ranked best in our strategic planning analysis for housing, tourism, and the built environment. In addition to the analysis that we have performed on each alignment, we also created a survey to garner public opinion on 3 alignment options. Both DCC and Tulsa Transit promoted the survey through various online platforms, as well as sharing it with their stakeholders. And we also held a public Zoom meeting in February where participants were asked to fill out the survey and participate in an exercise to identify potential stops for each of the 3 alignments. The survey itself was very short, only asking 3 questions. The first question asked people to rank the 3 different alignment options. And question 2 asked about their transit ridership. And question 3 asked about their connections to downtown, whether they're a property owner, business owner, resident, employee, and/or visitor. And on that question, we asked respondents to check all that apply. Results of the survey show that about, at least for number 2, that nearly 40% of those who responded use transit at least once a week. Over half of the respondents make visits to downtown on occasions, and just over 40% work downtown, and just shy of 30% live downtown. In terms of how people ranked the alignments, option C, the Elgin 7th second alignment, was tops. Over half of the respondents ranked it as number 1. Option A, the Boulder Cincinnati alignment, ranked second, and option B, the Denver Avenue alignment, ranked third. And this coordinated exactly with our strategic planning analysis. So based on the strategic planning analysis and input from you, our steering committee, as well as Tulsa Transit, DCC, HNTB, their stakeholders, and the public, we arrived at a final alignment for the Route 66 BRT. And this map actually shows the final alignment, as well as all the stop locations that were identified along the route. And we also worked with Tulsa Transit and HNTB to rank each of these stop locations from 1 to 22 in the event that any funding constraints arise during the process. Finally, we have this map that shows the alignment of the Route 66 BRT with stops and how it integrates with the Peoria Arrow BRT, forming a big T. So these two lines would essentially form the backbone to the transit network in Tulsa. And so at this point, we would open it up for any questions that you guys have before we move forward.
I don't necessarily have a question. I guess it's a question, but I'm curious, I guess, then why Kendall Whittier is not being included in this. I feel like in listening to the objectives and the choices, I feel like Kendall Whittier is it fits the demographic that the residents and people who frequent it fit the demographic of being lower income, Hispanic, in need of these services. We have the largest farmers market in the state in Kendall Whittier that also has SNAP benefits and double up. We have 2 grocery stores within like 2 blocks of Whittier Square. And then of course we have a lot of like cultural assets as well and things that people would want to go do. So I guess I'm curious why it's not being included.
I can jump in there. Jessica, so Kendall Whittier fell within the radius of our analysis. So all of those assets in the district were included in our analysis. And that section of the alignment was already fixed from downtown all the way to Harvard. The BRT was going to be on 11th all the way to Harvard regardless. So Kendall Whittier organization may not have been engaged specifically beyond, being a part of the, the steering committee, but, it was included in our analysis. Okay.
I just think a mile is kind of a far way to walk. And now that it's so hot, it's even more, I'm even more like, oh God, a whole mile would be really difficult if you went to the grocery store for some ice cream.
Yes, also when we were assigned this project from the mayor's office, we were asked to analyze the alignments that we showed in our first map, which is basically 11th and 21st Street with those 2 fixed segments on the east and the west side, and those north-south bounds that we looked at. However, I mean, it may be an option of checking bus transfers or seeing what options there are. I don't know if Chase, you're more familiar with this.
I was actually going to come in and say that there is the Route 410 does service the Kendall Whittier area. It travels up and down Lewis, all the way from O'Brien Park area to down to the Walmart at 81st and Lewis. So there is going to be a connectability right there at 11th and Lewis area. There's actually a stop right on the corner for the Route 410, so they could get off of the BRT and then cross the street and then stand at that sign and be able to catch the 410 to go back into Kendall Whittier.
Thank you, Leanne. I didn't see that you were in the meeting. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. And there are stops too. They're right by the Circle Cinema for the 410, which I believe is Kendall Whittier downtown area, right? In that area.
I don't think we have a stop beyond like 3rd Street. We have a stop on Third.
Mhm.
But I don't think I think we lost the one that was even closer to Kendall Whittier
Okay,
or Whittier Square.
okay, let me check on that because I thought we had just a pole and a sign, but let me definitely check on
Okay, thank you.
that. Mhm.
And to Jessica's point, this is Ken Busby, just two things. One, with the new expansion and growth of Habitat for Humanity and that huge influx of homes and so forth that's going there, as we're envisioning, as the Kendall Whittier Main Street is envisioning this area, the transit's going to become more and more critical. So if there is that spur that connects, that's going to be tremendously helpful, because I think you're going to see more and more ridership from that area. So I just want to say that. And the second thing, I completely understand the logic of everything that was and how you came up with whatever, and certainly the choices or options A and C were my two choices. I am curious about not, and just if you just go over the connectivity with TCC, because I keep thinking going further that way as a major player in an education center, looping that in option A, I believe it was. Made good sense to me. So I'm just curious.
I can talk about that too. So Ken, the good news is that everything is so compact and walkable in downtown that TCC is within just a couple of blocks of the BRT, so it does not go directly in front of them. That's correct. But based on the input from Tulsa Transit and Brian and Maggie with DCC and then their stakeholders, this alignment was, just kind of checked a lot of the boxes they were interested in from economic development. So we kind of tried to make sure the BRT alignment was proximate to both TCC and more of the core downtown area.
Sure, and I know it's a balancing act. We can't have a stop every 5 feet for everybody, and I know that. So thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not that far. You're right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I think we can move on. So I'll give it to John for set the land use framework.
Sure, thanks, Paulina. So I'm going to go over a program that the Tulsa Planning Office operates. This is something that can complement the BRT as it gets implemented to make sure that the it's as best as possible. So what is this? In 2017, Council initiated a mixed-use rezoning application program for the Peoria corridor, and this initiation is intended to provide a free opportunity for rezoning for property owners along the Peoria BRT. And this is an approach that can be used to enhance additional BRT routes like the Route 66 BRT as it gets implemented. And the goal is to stimulate transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development being pedestrian-friendly, affordable, and diverse. Since the initiation of this program, we've seen more than 30 completed applications along the Peoria alignment, a couple of which actually fall on 11th Street as the radius from the BRT captured that area as well. So first, what is mixed-use development? For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's pretty simple. It's development that includes 2 or more uses in one place, and that's characterized by being pedestrian friendly. Those uses could be residential, commercial, institutional, etc. And that comes in 2 types, basically, vertical mixed use and horizontal mixed use. So first, vertical combines those different uses I mentioned within the same building, typically with public uses on the lower floor, places where customers are going to shop, people are going to go, and the more private uses on the upper floors, such as residential units, hotel rooms, office space. A good example of this on Route 66 presently is the Campbell Hotel, where you have shops on the ground floor and then hotel rooms up on the second floor there. And then the other type is horizontal mixed use. So similarly, it combines uses, but instead of in the same building, it just has those uses on the same parcel. And so these uses typically are complementary and integrated in terms of walkability and supporting the surrounding neighborhoods. And a good example of this on Route 66 today is the Mother Road Market area and the surrounding uses. You see how that is horizontal in nature. It's not stacked, but there's a mix of uses all in one small kind of walkable area. In the Tulsa zoning code, mixed use is realized with kind of two main parts. So the zoning district and the character designation. I'm going to go through these. It's going to be a little dense, but hopefully it'll help clarify the different opportunities we have for rezoning along the corridor. Zoning districts regulate the uses permitted in a specific area. And we have 4 of those zoning districts that increase in scale and intensity, starting with MX1, which promotes neighborhood scale development, MX2, development that supports a larger and larger area. And then the character designation, these regulate the allowed building types on the property, as well as required building and development patterns. So things like setbacks, transparency, and build to zones. We have 4 of those, and those are termed pedestrian, urban, variable, and flexible, and I'll describe those. So like I said, MX1 is our neighborhood mixed use zoning classification, and that supports small scale retail dining and service uses, primarily meant to serve the immediate surrounding neighborhoods. This zoning classification does not permit vehicle sales and service uses, which is a topic of discussion on Route 66, but this zoning classification can help to guide some of the intended development pattern along the corridor. MX2 supports many of the same uses, but it's intended to serve many surrounding areas. And this classification permits things like fueling stations and vehicle service uses. MX3 is the highest intensity of mixed use, and that's meant to support large-scale retail, entertainment, employment centers, basically things that are going to attract a lot of people from a large area. And this is the zoning classification that accommodates some industrial uses by special exception. And finally, institutional mixed use, or IMX, is a kind of specialized classification for specific land area requirements like universities and hospitals. To get into the character designations, the first one, P for pedestrian, obviously supports a high level of pedestrian focus, and that's whether it exists today or is something that we want to see in the future. For both this and the urban character designation, parking is prohibited between the building and the primary street to make it as safe as possible for pedestrians. The urban designation has many of the same characteristics as the pedestrian designation, but does accommodate more building types. Then the variable designation, or V, this is for areas that are more auto-oriented or areas that are kind of transitional between pedestrian-oriented and auto-oriented places. And it allows for more flexibility in terms of positioning the building on a lot, allowing for some parking between the building and the street. And flexible has the same characteristics as variable, but again, accommodates more building types. And this table shows the different building types that are permitted in each of those character designations. And you can see that the pedestrian designation really emphasizes vertical mixed use, places where people are going to visit and shop. And then you get the same allowed building types for the urban and variable character designation with different site characteristics. And then flexible is the only character designation that permits duplexes and single family homes. And in contrast to standard single family zoning that doesn't permit mixed use, this zoning classification and character designation would, so it gives a lot of flexibility on what type of development can be done on that property. So how does this program work? Property owners are invited to rezone to mixed use zoning. So we'll be developing recommendations in partnership with the Route 66 Commission. Our internal staff team will be going out to the business owners, property owners, and general public to ensure that we come up with recommendations that are feasible and consistent with the vision for Route 66 and other areas from the Route 66 Commission, the Tulsa Global District, as well as adopted plans like Plan 66 that was adopted in 2020. At that point, property owners will engage in discussions with staff to determine the best classification and character designation relative to what was recommended to make sure we get the best final product. One way we're going to try to make this more worthwhile for property owners is through a partnership with the Tulsa Agency on Economic Opportunity, or TAO, formerly the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, to make commercial revitalization revolving loan fund dollars available. And this would be applied to the entire corridor, but those who pursue mixed use rezoning recommendations would be eligible for an increased loan amount. So we hope that that will encourage people to not only think about it, but pursue that free rezoning, get access to a higher amount of loan funds, And then this also complements a suite of development incentives that the Route 66 Commission is providing, including brownfield assessment and remediation grants, facade grant program, and the neon sign grant program. And I believe that is it. If anybody has any questions about the mixed use rezoning program, I'm happy to take those.
So to conclude with the portion of the Tulsa Planning Office, we wanted to let you know that this is going to be the last steering committee meeting, as this is the last phase of our study, at least for the planning portion. And the results or conclusion of it will be included in our BRT report. However, the work is not done. It is our intention to try to complete this BRT report by the end of the year, as some additional work needs to be done. And this work will involve the creation of subcommittees that will be following up in terms of actions regarding marketing and branding, broader outreach with the broader public. Like, we need to find ways to communicate this information to the broader public and involve, of course, property owners and business owners. We're thinking of public meetings, especially now that COVID has been easing. And also, of course, design and implementation of the service, which will be led mainly by HNTD and Tulsa Transit. However, the Tulsa Planning Office will remain involved and will continue to work with you as part of these subcommittees. And with that, we shall start with block 2. We're right on schedule, marketing strategy and outreach efforts. And for this portion, we'll give it to HNTD.
Thank you, everybody. We've got, I think we're going to have a fun interactive session here. So Kelsey, if you go to the next slide. So we're going to cover branding, marketing, and outreach. And we're going to provide some background on the branding process, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But for our interactive portion, what we'd like you to do is, if you have a cell phone or you can open up an additional web browser, we would like you to go ahead and type in www.menti.com and enter the code that's listed there on the screen, 1742 4360. So if everybody could take an opportunity to do that, this allows us to basically do an interactive polling to get some additional input as we go through the presentation. So if everybody just wants to take a minute to do that, and just let me know if you're having any difficulty doing that. I think it's easy, if you have a cell phone, I think it's easier to do on the cell phone, but you could also just open up an additional web browser to do that. It was also put in the chat, that the code. Okay, so I guess, Robin, before I turn it over, so the purpose of this next block is we want to describe the process for the development of the initial Aero brand. One of the things that will be highlighted in Robin's overview is this was a process that included stakeholder engagement and multiple touch points. And at the time, when this was developed in 2017 and 2018, it was intentionally developed for both Peoria and Route 66. So it was meant to be applied, but there was always the understanding that when we got to the second route, there might be some things that we're able to tweak or to integrate that would reflect other corridors, because the purpose of it is for everyone to recognize the Aero as Tulsa's BRT. But we also want to make sure that people understand the wayfinding for each of the lines as well. And then the interactive discussion is we want everyone to define the Route 66 design elements that we can incorporate. And it could, of course, it could be incorporated as part of the branding, but also the station architecture and elements. We'll describe how we want to keep some of those things consistent, but there are some opportunities to incorporate that Route 66 or neighborhood icons or elements as part of the system. We'll talk about potential branding options and considerations, and these are really just thought starters. Nothing has been developed yet, and as Paulina has noted, as we get into preliminary and final design, we will work with the subcommittees in further developing and refining those. We just wanted to get some initial thoughts. We'll talk about marketing and outreach, and then we'll also discuss those Route 66 subcommittees moving forward and discuss next steps. So Robin, do you want to go ahead and provide the overview?
Yeah. So, you're all familiar with the Arrow logo, and we're just going to go over a few slides that talks about how we got here and how this helped define the BRT service for Tulsa. So as Brian said, in 2017, 2018, we worked through a process that kind of identified and defined what the BRT service would be and what that branding and marketing campaign would look like. And this was part art, part science. They did a lot of market research to understand what was important to people and what names would resonate with folks. And they tested ideas with different focus groups and then came up with some logos and marker designs and things like that, and kind of went through the process. There was an advisory group that we worked through. We kicked things off. We talked about insights and naming and developed a creative execution of that throughout that time frame. So, overall, our marketing objective for the BRT was to increase ridership on Tulsa Transit and to generate a more positive perception of the BRT. And so we had to define what that was going to be and who the BRT was and who was it targeting. And so that was about choice riders, that they don't necessarily depend on the bus transportation. They use it infrequently, but they live in the area. And the transit dependent riders were the secondary target for the BRT. It was more about the choice riders. And the benefits of the BRT, it provided reliable service, buses every 15 minutes. It's fast and it makes people feel confident. And it's easy to use, and it makes people feel relaxed when they use it. They can hop on and off. They can easily connect to the entertainment areas, and there's less hassle with parking and mental energy of where they can use it. It's comfortable. The buses come every 15 minutes, and it makes people feel safe. So the message, what it really has to do is we had to generate awareness around the BRT, make it good and fun and acceptable for people to use that typically don't ride the buses, and we wanted it to be an option for folks to get on those buses that might not typically do that. And so, around the Arrow brand, with all this information, they created a personality around the Arrow brand that was inviting and current, dependable, accommodating, confident. And that was a lot of what went into the branding and the messaging and the marketing of the plans afterwards. And, from the Arrow, the Arrow concept, hearkening to the Tulsa Arrow space industry, the Arrow is fast, it's efficient, and it creates a service that people want to use. And so that's how they developed the Arrow brand. And, and that's what we see today in the bus wraps and the logo. And they also developed it so that it could be applied to additional routes, and that would be flexible enough to make sure that it kind of carried that through. And as we talk more about additional branding for Route 66, there's ways to apply that and to keep that to keep in the branding package and the strategy and the standards and everything like that.
And before we move on, I guess if you want to go back to that. So initially, the logo was the first thing that was developed, and the lettering and some standards. And the whole purpose of this is so that when people see this, they easily recognize that this is the BRT route, and it's differentiated from the rest of the service. So people know that when they see the Arrow bus or the logo, that implies the BRT in the 15-minute frequent service and all of the amenities and trappings that go along with the bus rapid transit. So people understand that basically this is the central spine of Tulsa Transit, and it's something that's easily recognizable and differentiated from the rest of the service. So therefore, it's important that all future BRT lines are reflective and consistent with that overall brand. So Arrow is the brand for all of the BRT lines. One thing that I would like to note, because Route 66 was also considered, and as well as future expansion of BRT as well, it was important that that brand and ultimately how it's conveyed within the architecture is reflective of Tulsa. And one of the common elements that came up was the Art Deco architecture is something that is expressly Tulsa and is something that is easily identifiable. So it was important, not just in terms of a logo, but those architectural elements and those Art Deco elements, kind of the timeless modern nature of Art Deco and those lines are incorporated into the buses and the stations and the elements. And this is something that applies to both Peoria and Route 66. It is interesting that, just looking at the corridors, Route 66, has even more of those Art Deco elements that could be incorporated as part of this. So this is something that's uniquely Tulsa. One of the interesting things that was kind of identified as part of those elements as inspiration is some of these Art Deco posters. And we might try to look at some of those elements when we're looking at different opportunities to reflect the unique nature of Route 66 and some of the neighborhoods on the wrap. So these are some of the elements that we first started at as inspiration in terms of how do we start to apply these to the station architecture, which is mainly the shelter and the marker. And really the marker kind of became the iconic element, although there are other elements, Art Deco elements that are incorporated as part of the shelter as well. So as you can see, obviously we have the wrap on the aero vehicles. The marker is the iconic element. The local architect, Centergy, and even the fabricator that we ultimately teamed with in terms of constructing this, were very excited about kind of that iconic logo. And that was something that really was, so favored really by the team, and everybody was so excited about it. It was actually incorporated as part of the marker. And it was exciting for us because this was really one of the first times, typically a logo would be included like it is on a bus, just like on with a vinyl wrap, or something that was simple that would be incorporated on a simple vertical marker. But it was important when we were defining this that marker be iconic and easily recognizable. So those Art Deco elements in the logo were actually developed first, and the marker was sort of built in around those elements. So the fin and the logo are some of the iconic elements that were included as part of those. And we think the architecture of that and the basic look and the feel should remain consistent, but there may be some opportunities to differentiate the Route 66 line, but we think that the look and the feel of the stations and the actual marker should remain consistent. And even the lettering and the components of the station also reflected the Aero brand, the bike racks. All of these elements are incorporated in even the stamped arrows that are actually on the concrete bench. So there are actually multiple opportunities to incorporate that branding and iconography into the station elements, and they were definitely done that way on the Peoria line.
And Jeff, I think we're going to get to your question that you have in the chat. It
Yes.
says, with aero branding, would destination districts be able to be coordinated with the design of the stops in our district so that we can incorporate our branding as well? And I would say, yeah, we're going to be talking about that on how that's going to work, and so give you some options or some things to discuss. So that's definitely what we're here to talk about today.
One of the other discussion points that came up is there an opportunity to reflect special districts or other unique areas as part of that, incorporating as part of that overall brand? And the answer is yes. And this has been done at one location along Peoria at the Gathering Place stop, where they incorporated a wrap and some additional signage and verbiage on the station elements. So this is the Gathering Place stop. And one of the things that you'll notice is typically on the station marker and on the back of the station, the stops are indicated by the cross street. So this is Peoria and this is the cross street of 31st. But If they are special unique generators or activity centers, they're actually identified with a name that are actually included as part of the stop. So this is the gathering place stop, so that people that come from out of town or other areas may not know that 31st is the connection into the gathering place, but they know this is the gathering place stop. And if you noticed when you went to other systems in other cities, they have those special activity center stops that are identified. So we certainly have the ability to be able to do this on Route 66. And I think part of it is we'll want to identify those areas, those special generators that need to be indicated by a unique stop. And that's certainly something that we can work with the steering committee, or the subcommittee to define, because one of the things that you want to make sure is if every stop is a unique destination or a district, it starts to dilute it. But if you have a few significant stops, that are easily identifiable, for example, maybe the University of Tulsa, as an example, we want to make sure that we can incorporate those elements in the name there. And then it was also, this is just an example of kind of a night shot of how the stations look. And I just want to identify this as well, because even the arrow branding, we're incorporated. We could stamp logos or unique things into the bench or the concrete, so you can see the arrows on the concrete as well. So it was important that basically all of these elements are easily identifiable at night as well. So in terms of the brand guidelines, we want to make sure, first of all, the Arrow brand was developed with Peoria and Route 66 in mind. So as we go through this process, the intention isn't to develop something that is completely different for Route 66. So for example, the station architectural elements, so the marker and the shelter should be consistent with the overall brand. Now there's some unique things that we could add to those, or unique elements, colors or flourishes, and we'll talk about that, that we could add to that, but we want to make sure that the basic architecture is easily identifiable as the Arrow brand. The other thing is it's important that the BRT vehicles are consistent because Tulsa Transit will use the vehicles, and they also have a number of spares that they have identified as part of the route. But just because of basic maintenance, they'll use Arrow buses basically interchangeably. But what will change is that head sign on top of the bus will indicate if it is Peoria or Route 66 in the general direction. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of kind of those basic guidelines. Before we start to think about what elements do we need to incorporate as part of the stations, and it could also be special generators, we wanted folks to define what comes to mind when you think of Route 66. And I think what we're looking for, it could be unique or special places. It could be different elements of Route 66. So if you want to open up your Menti, go ahead and enter a word. So in terms of this poll, we want people, and you can also just enter it into the chat box as well. But what are the key elements or architectural elements or features that define what Route 66 is? Okay, we have a few here. Freedom, road sign, neon signs, yep. Americana. Okay.
Looks
Nostalgia.
like neon is, yeah.
Neon is definitely one, yes.
Like that. Mother Road, nice. Historic.
Yes, that's a good one. Hotels, road trip. We're also getting Mother Road and nostalgia. Historic and travel. Cruising, like that. Okay, this is good. This is really good. Has everybody had a chance to type in?
Yeah, I think we've got I think people are still typing in, but we've got most of the participants have provided feedback.
Okay.
So, and Leanne's responded to KJ's question regarding this bus size. So thanks, Leanne.
Yes.
Because I would not have known that.
Yes,
So-
they will be. Yes. Yes. The buses will be consistent except for that head sign. Okay, very good. This is helpful. So we're going to note these elements, and actually the interesting one is the neon, and that's something that we didn't necessarily kind of think of in our initial brainstorming. We probably should have. We were thinking of colors, but in terms of how that color looks, we could look at opportunities of incorporating that, because that is definitely something that you think about when you think of those Route 66 signs. So we just identified some additional iconography and key elements just from our impressions of the corridor. And we've seen some of these in prior presentations, but we were just trying to look at some elements to give us kind of a sense of some things that would be good to incorporate as part of the sub-branding for Route 66. So obviously, the Route 66 sign and badge is something that's iconic. I think we had mentioned neon as well as part of these signs, but there's just some common elements that we have seen just in terms of coloring, the fonts, and then the Art Deco lines, even gas pumps I think were identified initially, but we took a lot of inspiration basically just from a lot of the signage that was included on Route 66. Are there any thoughts on kind of the collage of images, or any other thoughts about what defines Route 66?
I don't have a specific addition, but I do want to underline the fact that that traditional shield is as recognizable as Coca-Cola. When you start talking to travelers and stuff. So
correct. Yeah.
As much as personally I try to find other ways to incorporate other images in the route, everybody flocks to that thing. So I'm glad to see it represented so strongly here.
Yep, absolutely. We think so as well. The shield is everything. Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day because I was looking for other traffic signs to where on the route does it say what the speed limit is on 11th? I'm actually going to have to get an official answer on that question, but I kind of wish there was another iconic image that was associated, because 66 people see. So making sure, well, I mean, there's nothing to be done about that necessarily, but I would love it if there were no lights that weren't neon on our section of Route 66. So any way we can incorporate more of that is good.
You're saying, I'm sorry, to clarify, more neon?
Yes, more neon.
Okay, more neon. Got it. Okay.
More neon. I mean, there's the new, what is it, Reese? It's not true neon, but it looks like neon.
Yeah, LED tubing, like external tubing.
LED, yep.
Yeah, using that instead of any other lighting whenever possible.
I love that, because and again, that is something that we didn't necessarily think about. So this is great to get that feedback, because we were thinking more of color, but not how it's portrayed. So I like the idea of mimicking through LED that neon look. I think that's as important as the color choices as well. So good comment. So the other thing, and the interesting thing was, this was developed as part of the initial branding and trying to rethink what Route 66 is and how that applies to Aero. And I guess one of the things that we were grappling with is, obviously traditional Route 66 is associated with cars, right? And it was, it's America's road, but initially it was all about the automobile and all about the cars. But it's evolving in terms of more of a multi-use road. So obviously with the incorporation of the bike lanes and enhanced transit as well, that's one thing that we might kind of add to this graphic, just in terms of telling the story, is bikes and pedestrians and others, that this is definitely a corridor that is evolving, but still all about transportation. Any thoughts?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well,
just want to make sure we're not off base there. I do know that, and the reason that we sort of bring this up is because a lot of those iconic elements, for example, I'm just giving Eric a hard time, but he really likes the gas pumps And there's some elements that are, directly related to the car. Those could be related to other modes. I think we need to be, pay homage to the fact that, yes, we have Route 66 has been traditionally about cars, but now it is changing and becoming more multimodal.
Yeah, I mean, we can absolutely have air pumps for bike tires that look like old gas pumps, and I would love to see that kind of thing. Even electric car charging stations that look like old gas pumps on classic Route 66, because we really do want to promote more of that.
I like the idea that Tulsa is evolving, but not just from cars to buses, right? Like I think the demographics on Route 66 is evolving as well. So I like the idea of like incorporating kind of the diversity of Tulsa that you see when you cross the city through Route 66.
Yeah, and this was part of the overall like campaign in terms of ride differently for going to different events, for how you go to work, how you go to entertain, how you eat, how you spend your Sunday. And so there was a whole campaign around this initially. So I think it's there's lots of ways to incorporate Route 66 into that, as well as expanding on that in different ways.
Definitely. And I think Luisa also makes a great point in terms of diversity, as in Route 66 is the key element there for the route. However, we're also covering like the Tulsa Global District, the most diverse area in the city. Kendall Whittier is also very close, and we have the downtown area, which is like very well known for its Art Deco history, etc. So like we have all of these really interesting destinations and diversity, which makes this final alignment so rich and with so many opportunities.
Yeah, and we're going, it's all through the Muskogee Creek Reservation, all through the Muskogee Creek Nation, but the northern alignment of Route 66 is literally the line between Muskogee Creek and Cherokee, and and then when you go further to the west, the Osage Nations. We've got to incorporate the tribes in our thoughts along with all other groups that are here. Very good points, Luisa and Paulina. Thank you.
And one thing I want to remind for KJ's benefit as well is that back in 1880, the American Wheelmen's Association was lobbying for better roads for cycling. So I mean, we have a long history of bicycling on our nation's roads, and certainly Route 66. So it's like we really want to make that multimodal a road for everyone. It's how you get around. It's America's Main Street. All of that kind of feeling.
All good thoughts. And again, we literally pulled this from, the early slide deck that was developed early on, and it was our intention based on this is to update that. So we'll also fix the car that was noted in the chat, but I think noting those different elements, as well as, making sure that it is accessible as well. I think that was another good comment, is just to kind of note the folks that, those accessibility needs are very important as well to incorporate.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the Center for Individuals with Physical Challenges is right there on the route. So we actually will hopefully have higher ridership of people in wheelchairs on this particular route.
Right. Good point. Great thoughts. So we don't want you to actually vote on this, but there were some initial concepts that were developed based upon the Route 66 lettering, because what we want to do is we want to note or demarcate this as the Route 66 BRT that fits within the Aero brand. And there's just some common elements that we pulled up, and obviously we want to incorporate the colors that are as part of the original Aero brand, so that's again, it's easily recognizable. The bus wraps will be consistent, and those elements will be consistent. But how do we start noting Route 66 on the markers or the stations? So I think we just wanted to basically identify these and put these out here as an initial thought starter. And I think there's a Menti question here where we ask people to look at the different options And basically, if you want to identify the ones that resonate with you, and again, we're not asking you to pick one. It's likely that we will mix or match or identify common elements that people like. But if we're starting to identify, what do we start to do in terms of, icons or the names or lettering that we can start? We just wanted to put some thought starters out there.
Is there a particular reason on the coloring that B is a different color than the rapid transit?
It's we'll go through that. So we can keep a common color, or it's something that that green is the initial arrow colors that were used. So in some systems, what they'll do is they'll identify other colors, and we'll talk about that here in a minute that more pertain. So we can keep them all, the same color. So for example, we could use the black if we think that the orange, or it could be red, and we'll go over those here in a few minutes. But I guess what types of colors or elements do we keep it in, or do we keep the colors consistent? That's what we kind of wanted to get people's initial thoughts and impressions.
And so I think with a couple of these, with the Route 66 having the RT and the 66 the same colors, and the B a different color to kind of in some of the examples to kind of connect those elements and just set off the B.
So, and actually, if we go forward, because I think we just wanted to kind of get some initial impressions.
Yeah, that's great.
And then I guess, Robin, do you want to walk through this color palette that we've developed, and then we can have a discussion about that as well, because I think this is going to inform what we'll do is we'll develop that iconography as part of that we can incorporate into the station elements. But we wanted to hear from you all about, what is that, complementary color to arrow that fits within the Route 66 kind of aesthetic now.
Right. So we looked at several of the different iconic images and pulled out those colors, like the oranges and the reds and the goldenrod yellow and the black and the navy blue that's in the Arrow logo, and just kind of tried to identify where those stood. Those, as you've said, those can be kind of pushed toward the neon side of things to make them more neon-y through the way they're portrayed in the actual delivery. But those colors are the ones that kind of could be complementary to the like teal in the Arrow logo and the navy that's there already, in order to kind of help the Route 66 logo pop out. So those were the ones that we've pulled that that stand out most to us in terms of where they come from, and just kind of as our inspiration in developing the other images and incorporating them into the design.
So any thoughts on the color?
Quick question, actually. It's not listed here, so I don't know if it is just inferred that white is part of this also.
Yeah.
Okay. White's definitely, yeah. You'll see that as well. So
yeah.
Right.
Certainly for text and fonts and different things like that, but yeah.
Right. You see a lot of the simple black, white, red, black, white, and that's one of the things that kind of strikes me is the kind of clean simplicity of a lot of the logos and lettering that are included. So that's one of the things that just kind of struck me in looking at the different signs and elements.
I'll also add, I'm really happy to not see the interstate sign blue on here. A lot of groups try to incorporate interstate colors into Route 66, which is kind of macabre when you think about it. But
it's not an interstate, right?
Right. So I'm happy to see that you've honed in on some of these.
Okay, and then we agree on the neon. That's definitely something that we will, I think near unanimous in terms of regardless of the color. That we need to make it look like a neon. So there, and this is just illustrative of what we could do, and there's different ways that we could start to identify and reflect different colors is part of the overall system. And one thing that I'll note, as we develop this, we were thinking of the fin. The fin could also be something that is just consistent with the initial green. The lettering could be something that we do, in terms of that street name. That's something that we could do in a neon color as well. But we were just trying to apply some different elements in terms of a black, an orange, or a yellow, or some sort of color on the fin to denote this as a separate line, as a Route 66 line. And I think we've got a Menti question here. If folks want to, and I guess that's I'm sorry, I said black. Was that a blue?
It was like a navy
blue.
blue.
A navy
Yeah.
blue.
Navy
orange,
and
yellow.
black are hard to tell apart, except for in
Right.
the direct sunlight, right?
If folks like the yellow. And we included a none of the above. It could be a red if people, think about that as well. And we'll think about those colors. And it doesn't also have to be on the fin. It could also be on the lettering, if that makes sense as well. So we can play with those different elements. So what do people think of? Do we think we should leave the fin alone and look at the lettering in terms of the colors, or what are the thoughts, or at least initial thoughts?
So there's a comment about the Tulsa flag colors. Are those like the blue and the yellow? Or am I not getting the flag right?
Yeah, it's blue, yellow, red, and then like a bone kind of cream.
Mm-hmm.
I'll post the colors.
Okay.
And the neon color could there. If you notice, like there's a light strip down the side of the fin. And that could be a different color, or like the red or something like that to pop, or could be a neon kind of thing too. Looks like that a lot of people like the yellow as an option.
Yep, and I've got a comment from Leon, make the fin color and leave the letters white. So legibility of the letters are very important as well.
Yep.
Yep, I agree, color change has a lot more impact, so, okay. And then we've got a link to the flag. Actually, do you want to pull that up real quick, Kelsey? Can you click on that link?
I'm also wearing the flag hat at the moment.
Nice.
Oh, there you go. I see. Okay. There we go. Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always have to have the flag on our person. It's a law, right?
Got ya. Okay, that makes sense. And the yellow fits in with that as well as Tulsa. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thanks, Kelsey.
The only comment that I would say is red or yellow, including the blue, but not red and yellow. It's very McDonald's.
Good point. Yes. Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so we can also incorporate, and this is part of why we asked you early on in terms of lettering or a name that could be included as part of the marker as well. So we can do different wraps of identifying the elements. So the main marker itself is silver, but we can also start to incorporate lettering as a wrap actually on the marker itself. And there was a question about why did you make one of the letters a different color? It's just something that we can play with. They could also be all the same color if that makes sense. It's just that you have Route 66, but if you have the B in front, it's BRT 66. So it's kind of a play on the BRT and the Route 66. And I'll give credit to the INCOG folks there in terms of coming up with some additional thoughts on what that could potentially be. But we were just playing around with different ways that could be incorporated onto the marker. And this would be on the side of the street that you would see as you're driving by. And before anybody asks, we do have an option where we actually wrap the lettering around the marker as well. And it says Route 66 is right there. So I like that the color difference was incorporated to highlight it. Okay. So if folks want to, start to think about, and again, this is just kind of a thought starter in terms of what people like in terms of the different lettering and color options.
And it looks
we like the black and the green. Go ahead,
yeah,
Robin.
or the brand. No, I was like the branded option. Where it would be have the logo there and be consistent with whatever brand we decide there.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is obviously a little more heavy-handed. And again, I wouldn't get too caught up in the dark or black colors. There's different ways that we can do this. This could also be a way of us differentiating, like we did with the gathering place. There was an earlier comment on if we could actually reflect on the marker if it's a special district or destination that would be included as part of that. So we could include some things that are generic, or we can include some things that are specific destinations. Go ahead.
I like the, Brian, this is Ken. I like the idea of the districts, because we've just spent time with the commission launching Shop 66 Saturdays. And so we've identified districts along Route 66. It would be interesting if the stops in those districts, I mean, that might be a way to reflect, you mentioned not having everyone be different, but maybe within those districts when they hit, we get some consistency there, and it sort of all ties into this sort of economic development effort that we're making at the commission. I like where you're headed with that. I love it, Brandon, to you. But yeah, I think you're onto something really good here like this, and it lets have some distinction for each area.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we always grapple with is you might have a couple of stops within the district, so you want to keep those, because people are like, well, where's this stop, for this district? Well, it could be consistent through that area or neighborhood as well.
So this is just another question on what appeals most to you in terms of those types of wraps. It doesn't have to be specific to the district necessarily, but it could be. So just.
And it could be a combination, as long as we're careful with it, because I think we don't want to dilute it. So I think we want to use those judiciously. So obviously we could have a generic one that's on every, that's just for Route 66 in general, and then some specific ones for the university or other special districts. And then,
I'm sorry, do you mean, do I like the Route 66 wrap more than the university wrap? Or do you mean, do I like the idea of like having the name down the side versus?
So yeah, what it is, so we would include a wrap on every Route 6. So Route 66 is, we would include whatever that we think that demarcates it for the entire route. The university one is basically university or special district that we can incorporate. And maybe all of the other ones are just silver, but we have special ones that are identified for those special districts. And then the other one is just, if we can include some sort of iconography that's not necessarily a logo, but something that is different. And we'll provide kind of an example of what we were thinking on the next slide. Something that just is reflective of Art Deco or a specific icon that's uniquely Tulsa or on Route 66. It could be a combination of that. We just want to be a little bit careful not to dilute it and make sure that it could still be used from wayfinding. So I think this makes sense. I think what folks and what I'm hearing is that we like the combination, and I think it could either be an Art Deco wrap, or it could be something specifically, Route 66 if we have a logo that we have identified. So this is perfect and illustrative of what we could work with the subcommittees in terms of developing those. I think it was noted that a lot of these districts are already established. If there are already kind of logos or different things that we could start to work with in terms of incorporating, we can come back and work with the subcommittee in developing those, and then run that through that subcommittee essentially and kind of define it. Okay, and I did have a question so yes, because some segments of the route be outside of the name district, right? So we'll want to include something generic, or at least something that's reflective of Route 66. Is there an option on the wraps to include Route 66 fun facts, almost like U-Haul wraps? Well, it's maybe if it's district, I think we just might probably want to work with that through the subcommittee in terms of making sure that it's not busy, and then maybe, and the other thing I think, Leanne, I think you were noting that these wraps typically last, how many years was it? When you put up the gathering place, did they discuss? Was it like 5 to 7?
Yeah, I'm gonna say, sorry, I was having trouble finding my mute button, but it's.
So you're fine. So they could be changed out, but I guess it's not every year, just to think about it as well.
Well, and there's a cost associated with that too, so. think about, you know, how many stations you have and how many have to be changed out and things like that. So, but yeah, we asked them to use the 5-year wrap that will sustain our wonderful weather here in
And it doesn't have to be a logo as well. So this is something that we were kind of playing around with in terms of, you know, there's a lot of focus on the logo and a lot of people see that, but are there other elements in terms of the lines or other things that we can incorporate as part of the wrap? And what we were thinking is we have our special districts, but there could be a wrap that's just indicative of Route 66 without, you know, being overt, including the Route 66 logo. That's sort of easy. But are there other elements that we can start to pull in, you know, like with the lines from these the sign that's shown here? Any thoughts on this idea?
I like that because it's the gateways and it's east and west and sort of brings everyone together. I think that's a nice graphic.
Okay. We will definitely bring this forward as well to refine some of these ideas. So, oh, I love the deco with the Oklahoma sunset. And we could also incorporate colors as well. So I think that's something that we'll look to define because it's something that sets it apart, you know, just in terms of driving by. So definitely something that we can do as well.
And our initial version of that was way more neon-y colored.
Right.
But we kind of scaled it back a little bit just to so, you know, we can always reshare that option if that's of interest. And
well,
and there were some comments regarding the neon, like making sure that it's not too like neon color, but more neon light, like, you know, in terms of accents there. So we'll come to the right balance, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, this has been very helpful at us to start to narrow down some of those options because again, as we look at kind of developing the next architectural elements as part of preliminary design, we'll have something to start with. Okay, so we have just an overall question, and it could be a combination of all of these, but what elements that we had discussed appeal most to you or the most important to reflect? So we've got color, the texture is what we've shown, or artwork. And if there's other thoughts that we hadn't showed, we definitely want to hear those as well. Okay, so for the person that said other, I want to put you on the spot. What other elements that we had not talked about that we need to think about incorporating?
Yeah, that was me, Larry.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure neon was carried through.
Neon, yes. Yep.
So I know you said that. I just wanted to make sure this vote included.
Absolutely. Yep. We will note that into the record. And I think that's something that we heard, you know, that we got from this group. So I think that's something definitely that we need to incorporate. Thank you. That was very helpful. The other part, obviously, about the branding is this is the way to easily identify the services itself, but there will be also marketing component that will be included as part of this. So we'll want to be able to generate awareness of the Aero service among the target audience and, you know, identify those audiences that currently use the service. I want to make sure, you know, early on we had talked about, you know, choice riders. And I know Leanne would basically say we need to make sure that we're thinking about our existing riders and their needs as well. So they are definitely a part of that target audience. And we want to drive traffic to the Tulsa Transit website and Facebook page and increase brand engagement on Facebook through the process. And this is something that we did on Peoria. So example, on the buses, we included signs that talked about, you know, coming in fall of 2019. Obviously, as part of this, it was done on Peoria. There was existing rider outreach. We actually went to the downtown transit center and out to the riders to ask about their thoughts. And because we already have the Peoria BRT has been up and running since 2019, we can get some thoughts on how we can basically evolve those elements that were included and those amenities that were included as part of the Peoria BRT to basically make sure that we're refining and updating this as need be to meet their needs. So if there are things that we can do to improve the system, we definitely want to do that. Business and stakeholder engagement are going to be very important. And we're going to have, we're going to use help from a subcommittee and others to help us with that engagement. And we want to incorporate a diverse mix of media to maximize our exposure and audiences. So we're going to strategically kind of identify what makes sense and the seasons that make sense. And we're going to talk about this here in a minute. But in terms of the media outreach, we usually did something during construction and right before launch. We did something at the launch, and then we had what we called sustaining, which we'll talk about here in a minute, just to make sure that we're keeping it top of mind. And we want to target ads to a key geographic areas in terms of proximity to the Aero 66 route, and utilize digital ads designed to drive engagement and clicks. And I know there was a lot of discussion with Peoria. Early on, I think one of the early agencies were recommending that we look at television and radio. But really things have evolved quite a bit, and those digital ads, one of the benefits that we have with them are that it allows us to target our audience to people that are specifically on Route 66 and the demographics and the folks that we want to specifically reach. So it really allows us to target that audience. And we have a note, especially now that 5G is really good in Tulsa. So it's definitely something that we can target.
Yes, and QR codes are a great option to get
Yes.
people engaged in those and allow people to go directly to the Facebook page or to the website, and so and learn more about the service for sure.
Right. So in terms of the timing of the marketing, the new airline launches in 2024. In terms of the actual media campaign, like I said, there's basically the three phases. There's the pre-launch during construction. There's the actual launch. And in Peoria, we actually did that. We started that even during the testing phase when people were starting to see the vehicles and being able to use that. And then there's the post-launch, which is the sustaining. So typically what we see in a lot of launches is we get a lot of folks that are trying it for the first time as a novelty. But we want to make sure that we're keeping those as transit riders. So we want to have some sort of a sustaining marketing approach to keep people engaged. And social media is going to be used, obviously. And again, we're going to target that geography specifically, and this is something that we did with Peoria.
And that works well because with a lot of this, you can't start so early that people they tune out because you've been talking about it so long, because obviously all of us will be talking about this for a long time before and after, but you need to make sure that they're hearing the message over and over again. So that's that's why the schedule works out well in terms of advertising and make sure that we're geocoding and geofencing the right messages to the folks and getting the words out.
Pauline had mentioned at the beginning of the call that as we transition from the planning phase into the preliminary design and final design phases, we'd like to set up subcommittees. So we have an overall leadership committee, and Paulina, that's comprised of the City of Tulsa, Mayor's Office, Tulsa Transit, INCOG, and others. But we want to develop subcommittees that we could use. And those subcommittees would include an outreach committee. We had talked about marketing, but what we can do up to that is make sure that we're reaching out to stakeholders along the corridor and using them to basically understand what's important to them. So as we're making refinements to the Route 66 architecture and station elements, that we're keeping them actively engaged throughout the process. And then ultimately, before we open up the system, we're actually having them participate and helping us with the rollout and getting the word out. So that business and stakeholder outreach is going to be a very important part of the process, and it's going to run basically all the way through the design and launch. The marketing subcommittee is going to be thinking about the BRT marketing approach and strategies that I had talked about before. but we're also going to use them to refine our branding concepts and refinements as part of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is, based upon the input that we have here, we're going to work with our architects and engineers to talk about how do we apply these different branding elements. And what we'll do is, similar to what we did today, what we'd like to do is eliminate and refine those so that we could take those out to stakeholders as well as the public to allow them to vet some of those. But we would like to use or develop that subcommittee as basically a sounding board so that we can continually refine and update those. And then we have a design and implementation subcommittee. And this committee will be involved within the design process. So the different station design and refinements that we're talking about, are there some things that we could do to improve the shelter or the real-time information sign or the different station elements that are included? Or you know, how do we incorporate bikes as part of this? One of the differences between this and the Peoria route is, you know, we're incorporating bike lanes as part of the project. And then we'll talk about here in a minute, before we close, there might also be an opportunity of including some special lane enhancements as part of the BRT as well to make it more efficient. So we would like to have a committee that helps us serve as a sounding board for those design refinements. So the subcommittees will provide input into that process, and again, serve as a sounding board for those initial ideas and options. And I think, Paulina, we're looking for 5 to 10 volunteers for each subcommittee. Is that what we were thinking?
Yes, I think that would be great. And like Brian mentioned, it's going, the work from here on is going to be through these committees. So like, for example, the outreach subcommittee is really going to help us out with implementing those future meetings. We were thinking potentially one for the Midtown area. We already kind of covered the downtown area since we have that's those special meetings with the DCC, but we might want something for like the Midtown area, East Tulsa as well. So yes, the work moving forward is going to be through these, and the Tulsa Planning Office staff is also going to participate. Some of our staff members are going to be joining these committees as well. So yes, I think 5 to 10 people would be great from this group. And also, if you have any suggestions of people that we can engage from outside that could be great champions for these, that would be great as well. We can extend that invitation.
Okay, and we already have Daniel down for outreach or design. So, and we won't put you all. We were thinking about putting a mentee poll here and you know, asking directly, but Paulina, you're going to send out a poll,
yes,
basically kind of a sign up for folks. And again, it doesn't just have to be folks that are on this committee. It could be others that might be good to include. If you're interested, you know, please let us know, and we'll kind of note that. But just be thinking about it, and then thinking about others who might be good to serve on this committee. And then Paulina will follow up with kind of getting a list started.
Of course, thank you, Brian. Yes, I'll be sending up a sign-up sheet or a poll or something so you can sign up. But if you can express interest right now as well, that would be great.
Okay, we've got several others here, KJ, interested in outreach or design as well. So, okay. Can we get more details on the subpoints of what each committee? Yes, and what is involved and time commitments? Absolutely, that's perfectly understandable. We just wanted to bring up the fact that we're forming these committees. So Paulina, we'll talk about, but you might think about in terms of, before you send that out, kind of identify the time commitments and what would be involved. I provide kind of a brief bullet of each, but we can spell those out so that people understand the expectation and what's involved. We've got Ken as well. So appreciate everybody's interest. So this will be good.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we have these 3 subcommittees that we're proposing, as well as the leadership committee, which is going to be sort of an oversight. But as we know, yes, a lot of these specific expectations are still currently on the works, but this is going to be like a continuous work that's going to probably last until, I mean, I don't know if it's until we're ready for implementation or so, but we'll let you know.
Right, and they don't run all the way through. I mean, there will be some lulls, so we can kind of identify what makes sense in terms of meeting commitments and that. But I do appreciate everybody in the chat. who has identified their interest. We will make note of that. And then again, Paulina will be reaching out to you with some additional information and to see if we can kind of get others started. But it looks like we've got a good core already. In terms of next steps, so we're going to incorporate the input from today in terms of developing the initial station and marker concepts. And then we're going to form those committees, so there'll be some follow-up associated with that. There's also some additional work along with the advanced planning that INCOG is doing. So we've identified the alignment in the stations, and we've put together some preliminary costs. And this typically happens within the planning process is when we start to apply cost to some things, we identify the fact that, we'd like to build everything, but we need to make sure that those costs are in line with what we have within the budget. So as we identify any funding gaps, we want to be able to look at strategies through either phasing or finding some additional funding so that we could be able to afford to include everything as part of that final design. So as part of that, Tulsa Transit has actually identified an additional opportunity for funding. And if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to introduce this to the group and just make sure that everybody is aware that this would be looked at as a potential concept. So everybody is aware, obviously, that we have existing bike lanes along 11th Street, and that's included as part of the project. And one of the elements that we were not able to include along Peoria, just because of how narrow it is ways that we could incorporate, a design that we can incorporate into the actual guideway of the bus to make the service more efficient. So one of the concepts that we're considering as part of the planning process are business access and transit lanes. So what these do is they provide some priority to transit vehicles, but they do allow general traffic in these lanes to access businesses and right turns at intersections. So we're not talking about exclusive lanes that would only be with the transit vehicle. And this would only be, they would only be required to be operating at peak periods. So in the, in the AM and in the late afternoon. And the good thing about these is they're relatively inexpensive to implement. They could, even on Peoria and segments, because it's just signage and striping, they could be incorporated at any time. So even if they're not incorporated as part of the original project, it's something that could be added later. But one of the interesting things with these types of what FTA calls fixed guideway projects is FTA actually provides as an incentive funding to transit agencies and cities for incorporating these guideway elements as part of their projects. So to qualify for this funding, we would need to have these lanes in at least 51% of the BRT line. So they don't have to be on all of the segments and they don't have to be continuous, but we need to at least have 51%. And of course, the evaluation of the BAT lanes, and many of you may be thinking about this, is we would need to include consideration of those existing bike lanes and conflicts potentially, because that's something else that we would obviously need to consider as part of the process. And it may not work in specific segments where we don't have room with the bike lanes as well. So that's just something to consider. But because of the potential for funding, we wanted to at least evaluate this as part of the process. So are there any questions about either the next steps or the BAT lane evaluation?
Can I ask one question about the BAT lane?
Yes.
You just mentioned that there may be stretches where it can't because of configuration. So in a number of our, especially as you get closer and closer to downtown, we've already gone from 4 lanes, 2 on each side, to 1 lane with the bike lane. So my question is, to get to the 51%, can a BAT lane be the only lane on a stretch? And can we designate it that just to make sure?
It couldn't be the only, and I'll let Eric chime. I because it's shared, and that's something that we could look into. But and that's part of the evaluation again, is we're going to go through and see where we can get to 51% where we could physically do it. But we do understand there's some segments where it's not practical.
Yeah. Okay. Just wondered. Thanks.
And I think that's our last slide. are there any other questions about our next steps? We do have a question. Could the bat lane be the middle left turn lane?
This is Eric. I think we are planning to look at all options.
Yeah.
We don't want to have two-way bus traffic head-to-head in that middle lane because it just, if a bus is running behind or something, the passing locations don't ever work out perfectly. So but we are considering kind of all options to make this possible.
And if you're interested in learning more, you could also be part of the design committee. So any other questions? Okay, that concludes our block, Paulina.
Thank you so much, Brian. So yes, round of applause for HNTV. Great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You managed to keep the entire audience engaged for almost an hour and 15 minutes. So great job. Okay, so yes, that concludes our meeting number 3, and of course the involvement of the steering committee with this project. However, as we mentioned before, there's still some phases to come. That's why it's so important that we get people engaged with our subcommittees, that we're going to look forward to design and implementation, continue with the marketing and branding, and of course the outreach with the broader public. We want to hear more from the riders, from the business owners, the property owners, etc. So we're really looking forward to that, and we just wanted to thank you for your involvement. It's been a lengthy process, and we've encountered some obstacles in the way, but we have the information that we need to continue with the implementation of this wonderful project. So thank you so much for your assistance, for your participation. We'll send out that sign-up sheet. We can also send the information that was presented during this time. We also recorded the meeting, so that's also a great thing that we can share as well. And yes, be on the lookout for this information from us, and looking forward to great things with this amazing project.